They say the pen is mightier than the sword. But what happens when your pens run dry and your bank account is empty? Would you then see the sword as your only option? Hi, I'm Dev,
And I'm Cam.
and welcome to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So today, I will be telling Cam about the murder of Daniel Brophy, which took place in Portland, Oregon. Have you heard of this case before, Cam?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, good, because it's definitely going to be a super interesting story. But before we get into today's case, what are you drinking, friend?
So tonight I am drinking a Pinot Grigio from Bartenura, which is Italian wine company. I don't know. I love a white wine, so why not? What you drinking, friend?
Yes, friend, we love white wine. So today I am once again drinking a brown sugar boba tea from my favorite boba shop, Tide Sugar. Don't forget it if you're in the Jacksonville area. Honestly, just to be transparent, it's about to be a long night of recording, and I needed some energy to help get me through.
Facts.
And finally, before we get into today's case, I want to extend trigger warnings for the brief mentioning of mass shootings and school shootings. So, once again, I will be telling Cam about the murder of Daniel Brophy, which took place in Portland, Oregon. So, Daniel Brophy was born on June 27th, 1954, in Valley City, North Dakota. I don't really have much information on Daniel's childhood or his early life, but I do know that he got married as a young man and he had a son. But for many, the most well known thing about Daniel was his love of food and cooking. Daniel had a passion for cooking that led him to a long career in working in kitchens before finding his true passion, teaching. In the early 90s, Daniel had transitioned over to teaching the culinary arts at Le Cordon Bleu College of Culinary Arts in Portland, Oregon. However, shortly after working at the institution, Daniel's marriage to his first wife would come to an end, and the couple presumably divorced in 1993. And though I don't know the exact circumstances of that divorce, it does appear that he and his ex-wife split custody of their son. But the following year, in 1994, Daniel would begin dating a former student of his from Le Cordon Bleu, a woman named Nancy Crampton. So, Nancy Crampton was born on June 16th, 1950, in Wichita Falls, Texas, to her two parents, both of which were lawyers. She has described her childhood as pretty unstable, but that seems to be the only description I was able to find about her childhood. But one thing that you should know and remember about Nancy is that she loved writing, and it dated back all the way to her childhood. And this love of writing would take her to the University of Houston before graduating and becoming a writer with a focus on romance novels. Why the face, Cam?
So I thought that I hadn't heard this story before, or at least hadn't heard the name Daniel Brophy. But the combo of the writer and the chef is making me think that I've at least seen headlines from this story.
Okay. I will say this story is pretty infamous, so it actually wouldn't surprise me if you've heard it, even in passing, because it is pretty crazy. So Nancy would go on to marry a local police officer, but that relationship didn't work out, and as a result, Nancy would move to Portland, Oregon in the early 90s. So while Nancy's novels were her passion, Nancy still needed a traditional job to survive. Thus, she began taking classes and subsequently working at the Le Cordon Bleu College of Culinary Arts in Portland. And this is where she met Daniel. Now, fun fact, she actually met Daniel while he was still married to his first wife. However, there does not seem to be any suspicion of infidelity or anything like that. And for reasons that I'll get into later, I'm 100% sure that if there were, Nancy would have told you that there were.
I mean, listen, I somewhat believe it because it does happen sometimes where, you're like, man, so-and-so is so cute, but they're married, they're with somebody. And just sort of silently hoping for the day that maybe is not true anymore. So I could definitely see a situation where they met while he was still married, but didn't begin anything until after he was divorced.
Yeah, I absolutely could too. Because Dan is a pretty stand-up guy. Everybody likes him. And many people described his and Nancy's relationship as incredibly loving. And the couple just seemed extremely happy together. And reportedly, Daniel referred to Nancy as the love of his life. And Daniel's son from his previous marriage also spoke about just how loving and healthy the relationship between Nancy and Daniel was. And after dating for almost 5 years, the couple decided to get married and settle down in Portland, Oregon in 1999. Daniel continued to work at Le Cordon Bleu while Nancy started a catering company, but by all accounts, it didn't end up working out. And she would go on to work at an insurance company while pursuing her love of writing. The couple bought a small house on a decent amount of property where they could have dogs, chickens, and plenty of farmland. And personally, this has always been a dream of mine to have my own garden and farmland to grow vegetables and maintain my household at home as much as possible. And this was also Daniel's dream. He was so invested in gardening and the care of the farmlands, and he would actually harvest the various vegetables and fruits they would grow, and he would cook Nancy these really extravagant dinners, and she would post them all over Facebook and be like, look at my man cooking dinner for me. Don't you wish you were me? Don't you wish you were in love like I was in love? And it was right. It was mad cute. It was mad cute. But not only was she posting about the food that Daniel was making for her, she was also posting about the trips that they would take together. And Nancy even refers to a lot of these trips and events in her writings and uses them for inspiration. And Daniel was super supportive of her and her writing. He really wanted her to pursue her dream of blossoming into this romance novelist. So overall, it seems like Daniel was especially happy with where he was in life. He loved teaching at the Institute, and he loved his wife. He loved his home, and he loved where he was at. And to many, he had a perspective of what more could a man ask for.
And I feel like that's how it should be, like that marital bliss. Y'all both enjoy each other's comfort. He's providing for her in terms of cooking and showering her with love and affection. She's obviously providing something back for him if he's feeling like, what more could I ask for? So yeah, sounds like a great situation.
Absolutely.
But I'm sensing a but. Sensing a big but coming up.
There might be a big but I don't think it's the big but you think it's going to be. And we'll leave it there. So in 2008, Daniel makes the decision to leave Le Cordon Bleu to begin working at a brand new institution, the Oregon Culinary Institute. The Oregon Culinary Institute was a private institution where chefs could gain early knowledge they needed in order to pursue a career in the culinary arts. The university was known for having a very good reputation as it was not only a culinary institute, it was also a restaurant. And as the meals were prepped and cooked by students, it was relatively inexpensive for very nice quality food. However, due to the pandemic, the institution closed its doors in July of 2020, and based on my research, it has never reopened. However, during its operation, students would mostly talk about the impact that Daniel had as a phenomenal instructor, and that he was very well liked amongst his students. And one of the students even posted on his obituary, quote, "The food world has lost an amazing chef, instructor, and friend." I learned so much from you in every class I backed. End quote. Daniel had worked at the institution for over 10 years since the institution opened, and it was clear that he not only loved his job, but loved his students, and his students admired him just as much. And there are a lot of videos that are still online. I will be sure to add them to this video that highlight and show Daniel's impact on the Institute, how he taught his students, and just how he impacted the greater Portland community as he was very involved in bringing up the next generation of chefs. So, on the morning of June 2nd, 2018, Daniel Brophy arrived early to the Oregon Culinary Institute before any of his students or coworkers, which was his routine. At around 7 a.m., he began prepping the kitchen for classes that day, and as he was loading up buckets of ice water for his students, a single shot rang out, shooting 63-year-old Daniel Brophy in the back, causing him to collapse in front of the kitchen sink. His assailant then moved closer to him and shot Daniel point blank in the chest at close range. And both of these shots would pierce through Daniel's heart. And Daniel was left to bleed out on the floor of the kitchen he loved so much. In just 10 minutes after Daniel had arrived, another faculty member came into the kitchen and she discovered his body laid out on the kitchen floor and immediately called the police. Police and ambulances rushed to the scene, but Daniel would be pronounced dead in that very kitchen. However, everyone is still on edge because the shooting must have just happened, because there was a record of Daniel turning off the security system shortly after 7 a.m., and his colleague arrived at the Institute only 10 minutes later. And many people believed that there may have been an active shooter still on the campus. And with this in mind, police examined every floor and every classroom of the building. Thankfully, they were able to clear and secure the building before they initiated their investigation.
That is such a nerve-wracking, scary experience. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and a couple years after I graduated, there was an incident where a student shot a professor on campus, and it was in one of the larger buildings. And even though this was a seemingly personal dispute between the student and the professor, it had a similar effect where I remember texting one of my former bosses, and she was literally crouched under her desk because they didn't know who the shooter was. They didn't know how many there might be, if anyone else was wounded. And so just that state of being in that limbo is so scary. And then for Daniel's coworker that found him, I can't imagine something like that. One, you just saw someone that you probably see multiple times a week, if not every day. You just found them dead. And then two, you also don't know if you might be next, if you're also in danger. So you're dealing with grief, fear, anguish, so many emotions at the same time. Oh my gosh, yeah. I can only imagine how terrible that must have been for all of the students and faculty there.
Absolutely. It sounds utterly terrifying, but I am glad that the police were able to secure the building and nobody else was harmed as a result of this event. So once the scene is cleared, police start to take inventory of the scene, and they're seeing a couple of odd things about it. First, they notice that Daniel's wallet and all of his belongings that would be valuable are still on his person. They also find that there's no signs of forced entry into the kitchen, and there are no signs of a struggle in the kitchen. And this leads detectives to come up with only two possible solutions. Either Daniel was ambushed in the kitchen, or he trusted the person he turned his back on. And when detectives consider that all the valuable items that Daniel had on him had not been taken, they start leaning towards the idea that this was some kind of planned attack by somebody who knew Daniel, as opposed to an attempted robbery gone wrong. But police are running into an issue with this theory as Daniel's students sing nothing but his praises. And they talk about how Daniel was such an amazing person and that everyone liked him. Even students who thought he was a hard professor echoed how he was fair and he was equal and he was still well liked. They reiterated that he was quiet, he was kept to himself. And this just makes sense to me because who has a vendetta against a 63-year-old culinary instructor who very much seemed to be adored by everyone he met?
Right, because if anything, culinary school, it's not as long as, like a 4-year degree. And it's also not as expensive as a 4-year degree program would be. So if anything, if you don't like your teacher, if you don't like your professor, you'll probably get a new one in like a few months.
Right. It doesn't seem like this is the kind of thing that you're going to be stuck with this one professor forever for.
And so, I'm just trying to put this in the context of college students trying to get their degree. And I think that if this were like a more traditional 4-year bachelor's program, especially at like one of the super well-known Ivy League type colleges, that situation might make a little bit more sense in terms of motive because, there's a pressure of thinking, my career's over if I don't get the grade that I need, whatever. You might feel like one grade can mess up the rest of your life. But with culinary school, my understanding is that one, it's not a 4-year program. It's much shorter and it's also cheaper. And the other thing is, even if they didn't like Daniel as a professor, they don't have that much time that they have to spend with him anyways. So yeah, the whole disgruntled student motive doesn't really make sense to me either.
So yeah, Cam, I completely agree with you. But the police are like, we got to talk to everybody. And even if it doesn't make sense, we got to pursue all leads to their natural conclusion, right? So the police are trying to figure out what happened to Daniel. And they're suddenly interrupted when Nancy comes onto the scene in a panic, as she's heard that somebody had been shot at the institution. And when officers tell her that it is her husband of more than 19 years, Daniel Brophy, Nancy responds with, quote, "Yeah, I figured that after everybody gave me the sad sack looks," end quote. And police are like, okay, that's weird. Cam also made a face of, yeah, that's weird. But everybody grieves in a different way, right?
Yes. And that's what I was about to say. Everyone grieves differently. But I also feel like for a lot of people, they don't want to accept it. Like you have to force them to accept it.
Yeah.
And the police were like, yeah, it was your husband. And Nancy was like, oh, yeah, I figured. Yeah, for her to just accept that so easily is definitely a bit of a red flag. But you know what? Like you said, everyone grieves differently.
I agree. And I will say, I don't believe she said it nonchalantly, but she definitely said it matter-of-factly, if that gives you some insight. And this interaction is actually recorded. So I will insert Nancy saying this clip, and you guys at home can determine what you think of her statement and how she's taking this whole thing.
Dan is your husband, is that correct? So, I just want to let you know that we believe it's Dan that's been killed. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of got that when everybody gave me the sad sack look. Yeah. All I could think about is, oh my God.
Yeah, take one step at a time, okay?
I know. I'm sorry.
Just take it slow, and there's nothing you can. Just not a lot of things you can do right now. Your mind's going a million miles per hour. You want to pause.
Here's the terrible thing. Okay? Even if you find who shot him, he's not going to bring him back. And I want him back. That's the part I want. I don't care about who shot him. I just want him back. I don't want him dead.
So police are like, well, since Nancy is relatively calm about this whole thing, let's interview her about Daniel's whereabouts and what he was doing that morning. And she echoes the same sentiments as Daniel's students, that everyone loves Daniel, that he's an amazing man, and that she couldn't imagine anybody wanting to hurt him. She also continues about how she doesn't know how she's going to go on without him, that she doesn't know what she's going to do without him, and she doesn't even care if they find out who did it because that's not going to bring him back, and all she wants is him back. And the following day, Nancy took to Facebook and she alerted her friends and family of Daniel's death. And the post read, quote, "My husband, my best friend, Chef Dan Brophy, was killed yesterday morning. For those of you who are close to me and feel this deserved a phone call, you are right, but I am struggling to make sense of everything right now." And Nancy wasn't the only one struggling to make sense of everything. The police were also struggling to make sense of how this could have happened to Daniel. They initially tried to go to the Institute and get camera video from the Institute, but the Institute has no cameras on campus.
In 2018?
Yes, in 2018, not a single camera in there.
And to sort of like circle back on Nancy's post, I could see that. I would think that she would at least have alerted, Daniel's closest family, parents, siblings, all that. But I could see like, oh my gosh, Daniel was so loved. He had so many friends. I'm grieving. I don't even have the capacity to reach out to every single person. So, you know what? I'd hate to do it this way, but I'm just going to let everybody know so that they do know and that, people can come to his funeral and all that.
I completely agree with you because best believe if it were my husband, don't call my house. I'm not answering the phone. I'm not opening the blinds. The best you probably are going to get is a post that it happened. So that's all y'all can know. The funeral will be on this day, but do not call my phone and wanting to talk to me because it won't happen. The phone call won't be productive. All you're going to do is sit and hear me cry. So very honestly, this actually did not bother me as much as it seemed to bother other people. But I also understand I'm not close to Daniel. That's not my experience. But as somebody who has also found out that people very close to them have passed via Facebook, so I can completely understand the side of this that is hurt and upset that you found out via Facebook, and the side of you that does not have the emotional capital to call everybody and tell everybody over and over and over again that somebody died. I can understand both sides of this. So since the police aren't able to get any footage from inside of the institution, they do the next best thing. And they pull the traffic cameras from around the area of the institution to hopefully find some kind of connection or maybe a strange character lurking around the institution in order to find a lead to figure out who could have possibly killed Daniel. And the police find something very interesting on those traffic cameras. They find a man they are very familiar with named Oscar Taylor. Now, Oscar was a local man who was struggling with homelessness, and he was collecting cans in the area in order to turn them in for money. And the traffic cameras showed him walking around the area collecting cans shortly before and shortly after Daniel was killed. And unfortunately, Oscar had quite a few run-ins with the police while experiencing homelessness, and officers are very familiar with him as he had been arrested for robbery in the past. However, police are relatively quickly able to eliminate Oscar as a suspect due to them believing that it is unlikely that he owned a firearm at all, and even more unlikely that he would have killed Daniel in the institution and not stolen his wallet or other expensive items from him. So while the police are chasing down this lead in the case, they get a phone call from Nancy. Nancy calls the lead investigator 3 days after the murder, and she asks the lead investigator if he would write a letter stating that she was not a suspect in Daniel's death so that she could provide that letter to the insurance company as proof and claim Daniel's life insurance policy.
Okay, similar to the Facebook situation, I can see both sides here because on one hand, what do you mean by that? Why do you want us to say that if we're not doing that of our own volition? On the other hand, when people die under suspicious circumstances, it can cause a holdup with life insurance. And especially if you are suspected of that murder, that can cause further holdups. And when you're trying to plan a funeral and all this stuff, take care of bills, the life insurance money really is needed. That is, what it's meant for, is to be able to provide for that person's loved ones once they're gone. So I can see it from both sides, really.
I completely agree with you, Cam. I can see both sides of this. Obviously, people need life insurance to live on after that person has passed. But also, why are you calling me and asking for that? And it was so interesting. In one of the videos I watched on this, a woman was like, I've been a prosecutor for almost 10 years and nobody has ever done that before. So she thought it was extremely odd.
And you know what? Now that I'm putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4, she is a writer. I am sure she has explored many different tropes, many different motifs. One of them likely being the disgruntled partner who kills their partner for the life insurance money. And I'm sure she knows that if you are a suspect in that murder, it can hold up the life insurance money. So I will say, it only being 3 days after this happened is a little wild, because I don't think that there's bills you can't pay that just popped up in the last 3 days.
That part. So just how you and I are looking at the situation like, okay, this could be weird, but it could also not be weird. Police are also looking at it as, this feels weird, but it could also not feel weird. But either way, the police refused to give her this letter. And this entire call with the lead investigator was recorded. And here are the highlights for you to listen to. And you can come up with your own conclusion as to whether you think this is weird or not.
I don't want to be the stupid question of the day, but I think I need to be the stupid question of the day. So my insurance company said, well, just have the detective write a letter that you're no longer a suspect. And I said, man, I just don't know that he's there. And I'm not sure that he looks at it that way. But if you do, I'd get you to write the letter.
Why would you need that?
Because they don't want to pay if it turns out that I secretly slipped down to the school and shot my husband.
Well, we never would do something like that. I've never heard of that being done.
This is such a stupid little policy. I can't believe they're making me jump through the hoops like this. This is only $40,000. And as my sister said, usually when they do that, it's for millions. And I said, yeah, we weren't insured for millions.
I just feel like if you're on a phone call with a police officer, you shouldn't start the call out with like, yeah, let me ask a stupid question. And the stupid question is, can you write a letter saying I'm innocent?
Girl.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, Cam, this was a weird call for sure. But I think the bit that strikes me the most about the call is how annoyed she sounds in it. It's like, oh, it's only $40,000. I can't believe they're making me do all this for $40,000.
See, Nancy is over here trying to do reverse psychology with the Portland Police Department. Whole time, they playing chess, she playing checkers. Because I'm sure in her mind, she's like, here's what I would do. Pull up to the scene, distraught. Yeah, I had a feeling my husband was dead. Oh, I'm so hurt. Then she gonna call him, you know what? Hey, can you just write me a letter saying I'm not a suspect? Because in her mind, a guilty person would want to stay away from the police. She's thinking she's like 2 steps ahead. And then on the call, she's like, oh my God, you know what? It's just, I was just going to see if you could do it. It's just bureaucratic BS, It's only $40,000. I'm not even impressed about it. But I'm calling you 3 days after his death to see if you could do it. Yeah, Nancy girl, I'm sorry you're not slick.
And see, girl, you at least said that she was playing checkers. To me, she's playing Connect 4 at best.
She played Uno. She's not even on a board.
Bro, you're right. You're right. She playing Tonk.
A whole different game.
At this point. Look, she's looking at those pieces and being like, what am I supposed to do with that? So after this call, the police kind of blow it off and ignore it, but they keep reviewing the footage from the traffic cameras. And they find something even more interesting. They find a very familiar looking gray Toyota minivan that was in the area the exact time the police believe the shooting took place. And then the police remember that Nancy Brophy drives a 2007 gray Toyota minivan. A 2007 gray Toyota minivan that was given to her by Daniel's parents. A 2007 gray minivan whose license plates just so happen to be the same as the ones in the footage. And this is very important because Nancy told police that she wasn't in that area at all. Matter of fact, she was home all morning writing and just happened to be told about what happened at the institution and rushed over.
And this is why we said she's playing Connect 4, not chess, not even checkers. Because you doing all this pretending, all this acting, and you ain't even think to take a different car?
That part, Cam. So, of course, the police are finally like, okay, that's way too suspicious because why are you telling us that you never left the house and your car is in the area? Why are you calling us asking for a letter that you're not a suspect? And why do you not seem to care that Daniel was murdered in a place that he loved? So based on all that, the police decide it might be worth looking a little deeper into the Brophy family. And what they find out is that despite the fact that Daniel and Nancy represented a very beautiful, loving relationship, the couple was in a mountain of debt. And when I say a mountain of debt, I mean this couple was missing mortgage payments on their house, had taken out a multitude of loans that they could never keep up with or pay back, and they had completely burned through both of their retirement savings by 2016, 2 years prior to Daniel's death.
And he's only 63, you said?
Correct.
He ain't even hit retirement. Eesh.
Well, you can start pulling that money at 59 and a half.
I know. You're not supposed to, though. You can start pulling it tax-free at 59 and a half.
Correct.
No, and then they might have started earlier.
Well, I didn't put this in there because I was only able to find it in one source, but that one source did say that they had also taken out loans against their 401ks. Both of them.
Sometimes I hear some financial practices and I'm like, I didn't even know you could do that. I didn't even know that was legal.
Okay, so between you and I, so for everybody else listening to this podcast, it's completely illegal. You cannot do that. The money has to stay there. It's stuck there. But between you and I, you totally can. You absolutely can. You're just going to eat out like 15% of it. You're going to get hit with a fee off rip. And if you take a loan against your 401k, you have to pay it back to yourself. I'm not gonna lie though, that broke my heart, especially because I've been really getting into my finances lately and preparing and practicing for my future. And I was like, man, y'all are only 63 and 67. How do y'all have no savings? How do y'all have no retirement? That's so sad.
It's always so sad when you're like out and about and you see like an elderly person working at like the grocery store or working at like a restaurant or some type of coffee shop, because you're like, wow, like you should be home chilling. You should be resting, enjoying your years. Like you should not be out here struggling, serving people on your feet all day.
I completely agree with you, especially for jobs where I can tell that you don't want to be there. It's different. I know somebody who is in his 80s actually, and he is still clocking into work every day, but he loves what he does. He has told all of us at work he is going to die over his drawing pad. That is he wants to work to the day he dropped dead because he loves it. He loves it that much. He's been practicing for 60 plus years, right? So it's different if you love what you do, but it's different if you don't want to be there, but you have to do this in order to survive. And I will say at least it does, by all accounts, Daniel loved what he did. So I'm sure that made it worth it, even if he was still struggling financially. So with all that in mind, I'm sure you're wondering, well, Devin, how did we get here? How did we burn through all of our retirement savings 2 years ago? Well, it's been reported that the couple were attempting to do a renovation on their home, and that renovation just became way more expensive than the couple could manage, and they began missing payments, and they just never seemed to catch up with all the fees and everything that were burying them. But it has also been reported that Nancy had a great time spending Daniel's money, because you remember how I said that Daniel was really supportive of her desire to be a romance novelist? She took it upon herself to stop working and fully commit to pursuing her dream of becoming a romance novelist. The only problem is, objectively, her novels are horrible. Sorry. And I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, but Nancy Brophy's writing is to the same caliber as 50 Shades of Grey when it was still a fan fiction.
Real Wattpad.
That one.
And it's some good writers on Wattpad.
There are some gems on Wattpad. I remember.
Not so good. Yeah.
And the series she wrote was called Wrong Never Felt So Right. And in this series, it solely focuses on some kind of marital affair, a subsequent murder or attempted murder that happens as a result. And for some reason, it always includes Navy SEALs. Nancy loves her a Navy SEAL, apparently. And you can go review and look at all of these books. They are still available for purchase and for download. And you will find such gems as The Wrong Brother, The Wrong Husband, The Wrong Navy SEAL. So as you can imagine, Nancy is attempting to be this romance novelist, but she very much has a fascination with the sexual component of the romance. So when I say that Nancy wanted to focus on writing romance novels, what I really mean is she wanted to write what she called romantic suspense with very detailed explanations of sexual acts and sexual body parts. But here's the problem. I don't think Nancy at 67 had ever really experienced sexual pleasure or had experienced the sex that she was writing about, because it is so poorly written and so poorly explained that it's almost confusing as to what you're trying to explain to me that this man is doing to this woman. And if I feel like it, maybe I will go find some of my favorite descriptions and I'm just going to put them on screen for you to pause and read in the YouTube video, because I think then you will grasp exactly what I mean by this doesn't even make any sense. This is supposed to be sexy, but I'm too confused for it to be sexy.
That's never a good sign when the book takes you out of the moment and you're like, wait, what?
So to recap, Nancy is not working and she is attempting to be a romance suspense novelist. And as you can imagine, she doesn't have any money, but she manages to publish several books. And by several, I mean there are 7 in this series of Wrong Never Felt So Right. And they are published paperbacks, which again are still available for your purchase or download. I will not be leaving a link to them. You will have to go find them on your own. So I'm sure now you're starting to understand how the couple continuously ended up in the debt that they were in, as Nancy attempted to pursue her writing career. But Daniel, on the other hand, was perfectly comfortable and perfectly happy with his life and his job. And even though it didn't pay him an astronomical amount of money, he felt like it was important to do what he loved, and he had no intentions of getting a different job or working himself to the bone to pay for Nancy's lifestyle. And it is also believed that Daniel did not actually have a full financial picture of their finances and did not really understand just how much debt they were in. And Cam, I don't have a specific number for you, but I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt in your 60s.
That's scary.
Terrifying. So again, the couple is missing payments and they're falling deeper and deeper in debt. But there was always one bill that Nancy always made sure was paid in full every month. And that was the payments on a series of life insurance policies that she had taken out on Daniel. And these payments added up to over $1,000 a month.
That's not a $40,000 life insurance policy.
Of course not, Cam. And just like you put that together, the police put it together. So now they got to go track down these policies. And when they do, they find that the policies are actually worth $1.5 million. These are the same life insurance policies that Nancy attempted to collect on just a few days after Daniel's death. However, none of the insurance companies would give Nancy the money, as Daniel's death was an open homicide.
And I will say, I'm sure it really does suck for those families who have a loved one who is murdered and they have to go through this process and they have to wait and they have to struggle with it. But I also feel like in those cases, even then, they still wouldn't call the police and be like, hey, can you just write a letter real quick saying that I'm not a suspect, especially 3 days after the murder just occurred.
Exactly. And at this point, all of the weird things that Nancy was doing have finally added up to be way too much for investigators. Because remember, 1, she stated that she was never in the area despite the fact that her vehicle was there. 2, she has presented this beautiful, loving relationship with her husband, but has neglected to mention the financial stress the couple was under. 3, she's requesting documentation that she's not a suspect in order to claim on these suspicious life insurance policies. And 4, there's $1.5 million of life insurance, not the $40,000 she initially told police. So to officers, it's sounding like we have both motive and opportunity. Checked off the list. And with that, the police decide to place 67-year-old Nancy Brophy under arrest on the suspicion of murdering Daniel. And when the police show up to her home to arrest her, you know what she says, Cam?
I'm listening.
You're arresting me? Oh, you guys must think I killed my husband. End quote.
They hadn't announced the charges?
Nope. They showed up to her house and said, girl, you got to come with us.
And that was her response?
Yep. Confusion. Perplexed. Again, she is obviously playing chess and everybody else is playing Connect 4. Not the other way around. So now that the police have Nancy under arrest, they also have a warrant to go through all of her devices. And when they do, they find several more interesting things. 1, they find that Nancy has bookmarked a website featuring an article called 10 Ways to Cover Up a Murder. And they find that Nancy had written an essay several years ago called How to Murder Your Husband, which is probably the most infamous part of this case because she spends this entire essay just kind of outlining the ways that you could kill a spouse and essentially get away with it. Quote, as a romance suspense writer, I spend a lot of time thinking about murder and consequently police procedure. After all, if the murder is supposed to set me free, I certainly don't want to spend time in jail. And let me say clearly, for the record, I don't like jumpsuits and orange is not my color. End quote.
I'm just saying, all that research on police procedure, and she still asked them people if they could write her a letter saying she's not a suspect. This is why her book's not selling. Or why they weren't selling. I'm sure now people buy them because of the infamy of the case.
Of course. And you're completely right, Cam. So in addition to this, she also adds that there are specific points about police procedure and that murder is a better option than a divorce because do you really want to split all of your possessions with another person? But I think the most interesting thing in this essay is her thinking that anybody can be a murderer if they are just pushed into doing it. And I was able to find the essay. And this one, I will leave a link to it so you guys can go read it because it is free. And it's really creepy. It's a really creepy read retrospectively. At the time, you would read this and be like, there's no way anybody thinks they're going to get away with a murder following this nonsense. But when you know this case, you're like, that's horrible.
Yeah, and the whole thought that anyone can be pushed into murder. I think that many people in a self-defense situation might go to whatever lengths to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, I definitely think there is a specific set of people who will resort to murder to make their lives easier.
Correct. Because I have said this my entire life. If it's ever a situation of if it's you or me, I'ma always choose me. Every time.
Yeah, but it's like, if I can choose you and me, like, if both of us can live, I'm going to choose both of us living. There's many different ways to cut someone out your life without taking their life away.
Exactly.
And taking your life away in the process, because thinking that you're going to get away with it, especially if it's your spouse, is wild.
Wild as hell. Almost as wild as the next thing they found on Nancy's computer, which is all this research for ghost gun kits. And essentially, Nancy was doing all this research and purchasing pieces of guns one at a time that would essentially build a ghost gun, a gun that is untraceable and doesn't technically exist because you've built it out of all the parts that you bought separately. Now, this is actually a thing as far as my research was able to show. And it was very concerning for me because I'm not anti-gun at all. I definitely like the Second Amendment. However, you're telling me that Joe Schmo living in the back of his trailer can just go buy a bunch of parts of a gun and now have guns in his house. That's scary.
Yeah, don't want that.
And when they find this, the police had found that Nancy had spent over $15,000 on ghost gun kits and spare parts for a gun. Now, here's what's also interesting. They found that Nancy actually already owned a gun. She already had a 9mm in her possession, and the shell casings found at the crime scene were from a 9mm gun. And when the police test that 9mm gun against the shells at the scene, it is not a match. However, police are able to discover that Nancy had ordered a separate 9mm replacement barrel for her gun, off of eBay, no less. And this seems to explain to police why the shells don't match, because a different barrel will produce different markings on the shell casings. And with all that evidence collected, Nancy is taken to trial 3 years later in April of 2022. And as you can imagine, she pleads not guilty to the second-degree murder of which she has been charged.
I'm not surprised because honestly, you done put in all this work. You might as well stick beside what you just said.
Right. So her trial was postponed a couple of years due to the pandemic. And the prosecutors at trial lay out their case that Nancy wanted to kill Daniel solely for his life insurance and that he was worth more to her dead than alive. So she killed him. And she was doing research to try to get away with it. They also told the jury that she had lied to police when asked what she was doing. And best believe the statement of, "Oh, you guys think I killed my husband," was mentioned in court over and over and over again. The defense, on the other hand, made the claim that everything in this case is circumstantial. They don't have a murder weapon. They didn't have cameras inside the institution. So nobody really knows what happened. And yeah, Nancy's car was at the scene at the same time as the murderer. But that doesn't mean she did it. She might have just been in the area trying to get a coffee. And they even tried to suggest that the murder was committed by someone else. Does anybody remember Oscar?
Me.
You get a gold star. The defense also claimed that the essay and bookmarks that police found on Nancy's computer are just research for her new book, and that the essay she was writing was from the perspective of a woman who wanted to kill her husband, not that she was the woman who wanted to kill her husband, and that it's merely a work of fiction that police are taking out of context and putting way too much stock into. Now, to give the defense a little crumb, just a little one, the judge does agree with them. And the judge decides that it would be way too prejudicial to show to the jury. But the prosecution is allowed to bring it up. They are just not allowed to present it as evidence. The prosecution also brought up all of Nancy's novels that she had written. And instead of using it to show that Nancy had a desire to murder, they instead used it to show that Nancy thought she could get away with it because she had done so much research on murder. And inevitably, in every one of her books, there is a murder or an attempted murder. And the prosecution, as well as myself, wholeheartedly believes that Nancy only killed Dan for life insurance and that she thought she could get away with it. Because this is the one time where genuinely I believe in my heart of heart that that was a man who loved that woman, because there's no evidence that Daniel ever did anything to this woman other than love her, other than want to build a life with her, with their dogs and their chickens. And it makes me so sad because he did not deserve that. And in response to all of this, the defense basically states that everything that Nancy was doing that makes her look guilty was simply research for her next book, and that she would never be capable of killing Dan because Daniel was the man of her dreams, the love of her life, and she would never kill a man that she was so in love with, and that he wasn't worth more to her dead than alive because she wanted to grow old with him. That was the defense.
It's a defense.
It is a defense, and it's a very interesting defense, especially when Nancy Brophy herself decides to take the stand in her own defense. And I've seen a lot of people take the stand in court, a lot of defendants take the stand in court. And I've seen people cry. I've seen people beg the jury to believe them in their version of events. But I had never seen someone laugh on the stand as much as this woman. To me, it really seemed like she was trying to come off as this sweet old lady who was very relatable and, oh no, I dropped my glasses, ha 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 ha. That's how she was trying to come off. And ma'am, I need you to understand and remember that we're dealing with a murder of a man you claim to love, a murder of a man who is so loved by his community. I guarantee you, this does not land the way that you think it does. And on direct examination, she's able to wander off and talk in metaphors and soliloquies, and she just keeps on talking and everything flows really nicely. She was on the stand for hours. But the moment cross-examination happens, she is so combative and nasty to the prosecutor, and it is so obvious that she hates his guts. At one point, she even says to him, I think that your whole case is held together with glue because I know I didn't kill my husband. I don't care what your evidence says. And the good thing about this prosecutor is when she goes off like that, he says nothing. He allows her to just run off and ramble, which technically he has the ability to stop her from talking. But when he does that, when he allows her to speak, he allowed the jury to see how nasty she was, how everything came off. And there's a pretty iconic moment that many people call a Freudian slip, where she says to the prosecutor, I don't know how to defend myself against the truth, end quote. What's the truth, baby? What's the truth, sweetheart?
That part.
So the footage of the entire trial is available on YouTube. I'll leave a link for you to go review it and watch it yourself if you so please. But if you watch nothing else from this trial, please watch her direct and cross-examination because it's fascinating. It will anger you. It will make you mad. You won't believe the approach that she takes on the stand, but it was something to behold. I gotta be honest with you, something to behold. Also, during Nancy's testimony, she continues this whole narrative of how Daniel was so much more and worth so much more when he was alive because they were planning to sell their house. They were going to downsize. They were going to change their lifestyle and move and be very minimalistic. And they were going to figure out a way to get out of all that debt. But of course, the prosecutors aren't buying what Nancy is selling. And in response to this, the police ask, well, that's the plan you had for your life, but why was your car in the area in the morning when you claimed it wasn't there? And you know what Nancy claims? An old classic. I'm sure you can guess this one, Cam.
It wasn't me.
She even caught me on the counter. Okay. But not quite. She claims that she has retrograde amnesia and she does not remember anything she did that morning prior to finding out that Daniel had been shot and killed because it was so traumatic that her brain forced her to forget everything. And the defense even gets a psychologist to agree with this stance.
Tough one. It's a tough one.
You know, I agree, but I tend to prefer the term selective amnesia instead of retrograde, but that's just me.
And the thing is, she told police that she was home all morning. If she couldn't remember, that would have been the time to say, I'm in shock. I can't remember what I've even done this morning.
Yep. The prosecution also asked Nancy about the ghost gun purchases. And in response to this, Nancy simply claims that she encouraged Daniel to get a gun after a mass shooting took place in Florida.
Mass shooting in Florida. You live in Oregon. You encourage your husband to get a gun. So instead of getting a gun at a gun shop, like any person who does not need to fear that gun being traced back to them, you and your husband order a bunch of gun parts so you can put it together. Okay.
Well, I will correct one little thing. They did buy the 9mm. They bought that gun. The ghost kit was separate from that gun, which I have thoughts on this that I'll talk about more during our discussion. But yes, they had 2 separate guns, technically. They have the 9mm they purchased as a whole, and then they have Nancy's ghost kit.
So that still begs the question, why did you need to buy a ghost kit to create a ghost gun if you had no fear that this gun would be traced back to you?
Exactly. And you know what else is crazy? Daniel's son is an avid hunter. This man hunts a lot. And his son stated his father would have never bought a gun without consulting with him because his father doesn't know anything about guns. So you're also trying to convince me that you, as 2 elderly people who have no knowledge of firearms, had a discussion about a mass shooting that took place in Florida, and as a result decided that you needed a firearm despite the fact that neither of you have any knowledge of firearms. Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
Cool story, bro.
I was thinking that.
But despite the fact that everything I just told you was wild, you want to know the wildest part of Nancy's trial?
Of course.
Well, that would be that the prosecution brings in a woman to testify, and this woman says that she is a former cellmate of Nancy, and this woman claims that Nancy told her in extreme detail what happened to Daniel, how close she was to him, how it felt, and she even acted it out in front of her to show her what she did. And this is so crazy to me because you hear this over and over again, how people will talk about their cases and tell their cellmates what's going on. And this is so crazy to me because, one, why would you do this? Why would you be so cold and selfish and tell your cellmate about your upcoming murder trial and expect it to not come back and bite you in the butt? Because best believe one thing for certain and 2 things for sure, nobody in prison or jail is your friend. Do not tell those people what your case is about, that you did or didn't do it. Don't speak to those people because the moment they have an opportunity to rat on you to get a couple of years off their own sentence, they will do it every time. I'm not trying to give criminals advice. I'm just trying to protect the people. So after all of this evidence is presented, 71-year-old Nancy Brophy was found guilty of 2nd-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years to be served before she would potentially be eligible for release. She will be 96 years old. And while that might appear to be the end of our story, it is not. Because in 2023, Lifetime released a movie titled How to Murder Your Husband, the Nancy Brophy story. And if you don't know about Lifetime original movies, they are the Tubi movie of the early 2000s.
It's white people Tubi.
It is white people Tubi for sure. The movie has a 17% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and I would love nothing more than to watch this movie with you, Cam. So, if you all at home would be interested in watching this guaranteed train wreck of a movie, please go over to our Patreon, linked below. And if we get enough engagement with this post in the comments, we'll be sure to record our reactions to that movie for y'all. But again, it will only be available on Patreon.
Agreed, because I do love a good bad movie.
Same. But as we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with another quote from Daniel's obituary. Quote, "May the light of Chef Brophy never dimmer or go out." End quote. And that is the end of our story, friend.
Wow, thank you for telling me the details of this story. I had seen the headlines. I had seen like a couple of videos pop up on my feed, but I'd never delved deep into, what actually happened here. I feel like we say a lot of times that men have nothing but the audacity. But in this case, you know what, Nancy? You're breaking barriers. You are forging pathways where they never existed. You said, you know what, men, I see your audacity and I'm going to match it.
I'm going to raise you, actually.
And raise it. Actually, yeah. Call it and raise it. Because for her to, one, have committed this murder, two, to have shown up to the scene, crying, whatever, acting like she was so distraught, three, to have called up the police 3 days after talking about, yeah, can you just go ahead and cancel me as a suspect? I just need it for this little insurance policy I'm trying to get. And then to think the police not going to check up on this insurance policy. You doing all this research, but you still got caught on some very easy things. And then to still get on the stand, testify that you're not guilty. Yeah, nothing but.
And everything you just stated is why she was playing Connect 4.
Exactly. And also why her books were not selling before she murdered her husband.
Correct. And we definitely spend a decent amount of time on this podcast talking about how men have the audacity, how men can be scary. And I wanted to highlight this case to, one, just highlight a good man through and through. A good man to his core. Apparently the only person who ever hated him was his ex-wife. But, we don't really know what happened there.
Right.
And it's just so sad because, yeah, okay, you killed him for life insurance, I guess. But this was a good man for you. This was a good man to you. He supported you. Do you know how hard it is to find a man who very genuinely supports your aspirations in life? Who wants you to support, especially romance suspense novels? You found a man that is willing to support you as you write smut? And you murdered him? I'm sorry.
No comment.
I'm sorry. I don't know very many men who would support their significant other making no money on said smut as well.
Right. Not even good smut. Because there's some good smut out there, but you're not even meeting the level that you need to meet.
Exactly. Yeah, and this case just breaks my heart. I absolutely hate it. Daniel seemed like such an incredible man. Everybody loved him. Everybody adored him. And so many people never deserve to leave this earth the way that they do. But Daniel especially did not deserve to leave this earth the way that he did. Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope, that's all I've got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on today's episode. I'd also like to thank Brittany Vaughn, Mike from That Chapter, and the Law and Crime Network for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram and TikTok.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to tell a friend and leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you are listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.